welcome back to Spinal Cast. I'm your host, David Stevens, and joining us today is Nick LiBassi. Alongside his impressive resume, which includes having served on the board of directors for the United Spinal Association and Disability Advisory Board for Alaska and Virgin America Airlines, Nick is also a former municipal mayor, deputy mayor, police commissioner, fire commissioner for the township of Rochelle Park in New Jersey. Nick currently works as the vice president of sales for Mobius Mobility. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, David, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I do have to say that's one heck of a resume or a background there, and I don't even think we mentioned half of what you provided with us. So
that's what happens when you get older. you get all of these things you're involved with.
Well, and you're clearly a dedicated hard worker. So it's something that I think is worth mentioning. So I think our hope for today is kind of learn a little bit more about you, talk about your story, and kind of get your perspective on spinal cord injury and your way of handling it and things like that. If that sounds good to you, I think we'll kind of kick things off.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So first and foremost, I think the best place to start would be, your injury. Would you be willing to tell us kind of about your accident and what took place and how it all went down?
Yep. So I'll be coming on 27 years. I'm a T10 Asia A para. I was injured in a skydiving accident in 1996, November. Was in a midair collision with another skydiver, and we collided at terminal velocity. And I snapped my femur in half and ripped a lot of my gear. I wasn't able to deploy my main chute. I was able to get my reserve out, but because my femur was broken, my leg was behind my head when the reserve came out. It wrapped around my leg, so it never fully deployed.
Oh my gosh.
I fell over 15,000 feet and landed in the woods, probably about a quarter of a mile away from the drop zone landing area in the airport. And they think I hit between 85 and 95 miles an hour. So it was horrific. Crazy that I didn't pass out. I was totally awake the entire time, including on impact. I laid there. I had known I broke my back. I obviously was staring at one of my feet and couldn't find the other that was wedged into the ground. So I waited for help to arrive, and I saw people peeking through the woods, like wondering what they were going to see. And I waved them, let them know I was okay. They came to get me. I asked them not to move me until the paramedics got there, and they did. They extricated me and airlifted me to a level 1 trauma center where I had over 16 hours of surgery to fix my spine and orthopedic injuries.
Oh my gosh.
I was in the hospital, in the acute hospital for 7 days, and then was released to Kessler Rehabilitation is where I did my rehab.
Okay. And where is that located?
That's in West Orange, New Jersey. It's a model spinal cord center, one of only 15 or 16 around the country. So I was fortunate that it's not far from my house. Ironically, it was over 4 hours from where I was injured, but I was away from home. So when I got to Kessler, I was a lot closer to family and friends.
Yeah, that's definitely a benefit.
Yeah.
So going back to the injury story, I mean, it's incredible that you survived an accident like that. What happened to the other gentleman or lady who jumped with you?
It was a gentleman. It was actually a Pennsylvania state trooper. I had just met him that morning. He bruised his elbow. I saw after he hit me, I watched him deploy his chute. So I knew he was able to deploy, but it was all split second. He bruised his elbow, but no other injuries than that.
Well, if there's any silver lining, at least not both of you were severely injured from the collision. That's good to hear. But clearly a life-altering injury at that. So now kind of jumping to the rehab that you discussed, was there anything in particular that you appreciated about rehab or that you learned to love about rehab, or was the whole process kind of a grind and not a whole lot of fun?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's a grind. Looking back on it, I think you have so many, put aside the physical rehabilitation and the exercises and stretching and all of that you do, the physical aspect of it, but just the mental was the most difficult. 26 years old, used to doing everything independently, to become, paraplegic is, it's just more mental.
Yeah.
And emotional than anything. I mean, the physical stuff. I played football. I wrestled. I was very active. I worked out all the time. The physical stuff, that wasn't going to get me. It was more of the mental. Trying to every day, just trying to be positive enough to get to the next step of, all right, listen, today I'm gonna sit up a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn to dress. I'm going to figure out how I dress myself laying in a bed, just those types of things. Bowel and bladder are big issues when you become paralyzed. And again, the emotional, when you put all of the emotional stuff, as big as that is, you still have to, you still have routines that you need to do. And you still need to take care of yourself. So I don't know if there's anything that I loved about it. Again, looking back, hindsight's 2020. I think looking back, I don't want to even say proud of myself, but probably proud of myself that I was able to get through it, because when I think back, it was a dark, dark time. There's times that I go to the same rehab center now to visit. Yeah. And as soon as I go in the door, the smells, even after almost 30 years, just takes me right back mentally. I get a pit in my stomach. So, just the mental aspects of it was really brutal. And I know many people that have, listen, if you can't walk, you can't walk. You're going to learn, the physical part's the physical part, learning how to reach things. It's the mental part, it's the mental day to day, it never escapes. You just have to always stay positive. And I would say that that's a positive, that's something that I learned is, don't let it get you down. There's things that are going to come in your way. Right. You just have to be strong enough mentally to overcome them.
Yeah, no, I think that's, completely valid, and actually that makes me think, was there any component of the rehab process in which you were talking to I guess psychologist or someone to assist with the mental side of it?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I at least the rehab I was in, and I know it's not uncommon in the model spinal cord centers, you have a team. So you have your physiatrist, which is your rehab doctor. You have your urologist, you have your nurses, you have your aides, you have your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, and your psychology team. So you're required to meet with them once a week. So I pretty much just went in there. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. First of all, when I was injured, I couldn't sit up. I couldn't sit up more than 15 degrees, which is virtually nothing. I mean, I had troubles sipping soup. Wow. Because I had bruised my pelvis and I couldn't weight bear on my pelvis. So for 9 weeks, over 2 months, I couldn't sit up more than 15 degrees. So everywhere they took me, they had to roll me in my bed. So I'd be in the psychiatrist or psychology department working with one of them, and I pretty much told them what they wanted to hear. I just didn't want to be there. I just wasn't ready. And I'm a firm believer, if you seek psychological help, you have to want to do it, I think it's probably like any type of, an addiction or something like that. You need to want to do it. And at that time, I just didn't want to do it. About 2 years later, I started to get a bout of depression, and I sought out somebody from that rehab center that wasn't the person I had spoken with 2 years before, but someone that I ran into in the hallway and became friendly with, and I felt comfortable with her. Yeah. And we started talking, and she was a huge help. So when I was ready to do it, it was a big help. It just that initially I wasn't ready to do it at all. I was in denial for myself, and I felt personally like I needed to come to terms with it before I could try to articulate it to someone that I don't know.
Right. I think that's totally fair. I myself has had my own difficulties. I'm going on my it's 6th year of sobriety, coming on September 3rd, and so. I've had plenty of days and evenings spent in a room with somebody talking about where my head is at, and I think you're totally right. It for me, it came down to a want to change, and this thing in the back of my head that said I can't keep living the way I'm living. and I want something different. And that really kind of curtailed into those discussions becoming incredibly valuable. And I just kind of let all the walls down and, became comfortable with who I was and what the situation was.
Yep.
And then once I kind of let that stuff be the truth, then the rest kind of came easy. It felt like every time I went in there, it was a weight off my shoulders.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think, for me personally, it just happened to be the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
I still have the utmost respect for her whenever I see her, which is infrequent. But maybe once every 2 or 3 years. She's since retired, but I've run into her at some shows that I do. And I just have nothing but great feelings for her, for the help that she provided. And really, it wasn't like she was telling me what to do. She was just listening,
Yeah.
And it was just
exactly.
I was ready for it, and she was the right person on the other end. So it worked out well. And I would never demean it. I don't think that, I don't know if it's for everyone. That's not for me to say. I know that I never thought it was for me, but then when I found the right connection and the timing was right, it's something that I know now definitely helped me without a doubt.
Yeah, I completely feel similarly about my situation. So, well, let's kind of switch gears then. So we kind of talked about the injury and the rehab, and given your history background of all these different roles and positions in your working life, you're clearly dedicated to your career. So how did you transition, into a new career post-injury, or like how did you transition back to work?
Yeah, well, first I want to say that work was probably the best thing. Going back to work was the best thing that I ever did. It normalizes you to a degree that you can't do on your own. There's something to be said to get up every morning, shower, go into the office, go to work, interact with other people. It made me forget about my disability, which again, I wasn't trying to deny it at that point. It was just that I was trying to live a life like everyone else. And when you're in the midst of working with peers, you're like everyone else.
Right.
So having said that, I was a carpenter by trade before I was injured. I had a successful business. And when I couldn't do that any longer, and I probably could have, in a different
to some degree,
in a different capacity. I just know how I was physically wanting to do everything. And it would just, I know when I was first injured, that the thought of not being able to do something really brought me down, and I didn't want to put myself in that situation multiple times a day, going to a job site and not being able to, reach something or being able to do something myself. It just would have been more negative than positive for me. So what I did do is I decided, I put a business plan together, and I did this 6 months after I was injured. I did it 6 months after I was injured. I put a business plan together. I went to vocational rehabilitation in my county, got some funds to buy a computer. I started doing some research. And again, this was in 96, this was early 97. So it wasn't like now. I mean, it was dial up. It was, it wasn't great like it is now. But I had, the one thing I had was time. So I spent looking and researching, and I decided I was going to start a small woodworking business. And that's what I did. I found the building that I rented or leased, and then bought all brand new tools and modified either the tools or the way that I would use them. And I built all different types of small furniture, cabinetry, wooden end tables, things for like baby stores. I made rocking horses, tons and tons of stuff. So I did stuff for outdoors. One thing I was not motivated. I was motivated to do something. So I started out building like pressure treated wheelbarrows and bird baths and wishing wells, and I think I went to like 150, personally went to 150 with my dad, different landscaping nurseries around in the state, and, said, hey, this is what I have. I had a trunk full of stuff. Yeah. This is what it was.
Sold your wares.
And that's how it started. I did that for a couple of years, and I didn't want to, it was very physical. And I guess, that time I was close to getting 30, and I was like, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do this. I was wheeling with long, my shop was set up, it was on the ground level, but I'd get a load of the wood delivered, heavy knotty pine or oak or, black walnut, whatever it was, maple, heavy stuff in long lengths. I was moving that all around, putting it on the saws, and it was fine, but it was a lot. And I started to realize that I was going to need my shoulders as I aged, pushing a wheelchair. And I didn't want to ruin them. And I thought that I could do something else. I wanted to try something else. So at the time, I had started hosting a golf outing to raise money for spinal cord injury research that I would give to University of Rutgers. Yeah. And I had my first outing, $1,000, $1,200, whatever I raised. And between that first outing and the next outing, Dr. Wise Young from Rutgers and Dr. Morton had called me and said, "Hey, we're having a black tie fundraiser in Lincoln Center in New York. I don't live too far. Would you like to attend?" I said, "Absolutely." I went and rented a tuxedo, and I sat at a table with 9 other people I never had met before in my life. They were a sponsor. They were Johnson & Johnson. And I just hit it off with a bunch of the people that were at the table. One of them happened to be vice president of sales for a division within J&J, and the other was a director of human resources. I told them about my golf outing. They said, "We'd love to play next year." I kept in touch with them. I invited them. They came, and they got Johnson & Johnson to sponsor a hole. We started a friendship. They approached me with an opportunity to work at Johnson & Johnson, and ultimately I was hired and worked under that VP of sales for several years. But that was my foray into, the professional realm.
The corporate world.
Yeah.
What a cool story, though. I mean, I love that it's the community, like basically the SCI community, that kind of helped branch you into these new opportunities in your life.
Yep. And so the product was the iBOT, which is a high-tech wheelchair, and this was back in 2001 or 2002, well ahead of its time then. So it was difficult to get penetration into the market. There were a lot of different things, including FDA, the way the FDA classified it, and the ability to customize the device for individuals. So it was difficult, but J&J ultimately made the decision after 6 or 7 years not to sell the product anymore. I was one of the last people on because I was in sales management at the time, so I was responsible for making sure that all the sales reps had closed out properly, got their vehicles, that I got vehicles returned, storage unit shut down. So it was kind of depressing because it was great to be able to see so many people benefit from the product, and then here I am, closing shop. It was difficult.
Yeah.
But I wound up going to another J&J company recruited me. So I didn't even have any time from the day I left. The following week, I started the new position, and it was for a company within J&J called Aura Pharma, selling periodontal injectable antibiotic for periodontal disease, and I disliked it tremendously.
Not your cup of tea, huh?
No, I didn't like calling on dentists and surgeons. So I did that for while I was with J&J, I had been asked to sit on the board of directors for United Spinal Association, and I did do that. So it was probably about 3 years I was on the board when I took this other J&J job, and we had a scheduled board meeting face to face in Orlando, and the board members all flew in, and there were several different programs within the organization, and everyone was pretty much asked to split up into groups and take a different segment and talk about how it can be improved, what we're doing good, and what needs changes.
Right.
There was an organization within United Spinal called Wheelchair Medic, which was a wheelchair repair service in at the foot of the Throgs Neck Bridge.
Okay.
And they did a lot of wheelchair repairs for Eastern Paralyzed Veterans, which ultimately became United Spinal Association. And that was the business that I was asked to work on with 2 or 3 other board members. After several hours, we came back and we identified that it's a profitable business, but it could do more, just needed leadership. There was no one, there was a shop manager and several techs and a big warehouse, and, but there was no one driving the business. And so that was our presentation. We get up there to present, and my group nominated me to present. So I explain everything to the rest of the board, and the other board members go through their analysis of the different programs.
Yeah.
About a week later, I got a call from the CEO, and he said, we were thinking about it. What would you consider coming, leaving the board and coming to run Wheelchair Medic? And I really didn't even have to think too much about it. It was just the right time. I wasn't happy doing what I was doing with the Johnson & Johnson company. So I left, and I figured, try to give back. I had done well up until that point, and I just followed my heart, and I went, and I did really well. I mean, within 6 months, the CEO asked me to come in and work directly under him as Director of Special Projects, which was a great title because I couldn't be pigeonholed into one thing. I did everything, which was pretty awesome.
You wore a bunch of hats.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Many hats.
Yep. I got exposure to a lot of different things. And then ultimately wound up being vice president of chapter leadership and chapter relations. So I built a chapter network for them, which is something I'm very proud of. I still have a lot of great contacts around the country from doing that. Several other things that I implemented there. So it was really a special time for me. I was there for 11 years.
Oh, wow.
And then 3 years ago, I was at a trade show, and the booth next to me was the iBOT, which had come back on the market.
Full circle. And
it was something that I loved, almost 20 years ago. And I had the opportunity to help them, and I chose to do it. So it was difficult leaving United Spinal, but I still keep in touch with everyone there. And now in my role here, we support them in various different initiatives that they have as sponsors. We're sponsors to a couple of their programs. So I couldn't be more happy. It's very exciting, very challenging, very rewarding.
As I was preparing to jump on this call with you today, I did go ahead and poke around at your Mobius Mobility's website, and I got looking at the iBOT. Is it the PMT or
PMD, Personal Mobility?
PMD.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. It is flipping incredible. That device is remarkable.
Yep.
And for anybody who's listening or watching, we'll make sure we put a link down to your guys' website in the description. But you should check it out because it's I think a lot of people would benefit from something like that, and so it's very cool. I guess my question is, do you get to use one?
Yeah, I use one. I use one all the time. So I travel pretty much around the country. We have 23 VA centers. The spinal cord centers that have a demo unit and are trained to show their veterans and to do some of the training with them. But I do trade shows around the country. Just last week, I did the DAV annual convention, which was 5 days we exhibited. So I was in an iBOT for 5 straight days doing stairs. I mean, I do a lot of repetition, but it's very rewarding because it does change lives, and you get to see firsthand. You get to see firsthand how people benefit from it, which is incredible.
Totally.
And a cool thing, I mentioned the VA. So we've had we're on the federal supply schedule with the VA and have been for a couple of years. So that's been a main source of our revenue, other than cash or cash pay or private pay. We also work with a lot of nonprofits that have paid for devices for different individuals. But we recently received our ACHC accreditation, which allows us to build private insurance companies, and in turn also allow us to file for our Medicare provider status, which we hope to receive in the next couple of months. So yeah, things are definitely progressing, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to offer this to more and more people.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I from our discussions with other people who have, they're not what I would call cures, but they're definitely solutions that make a huge difference in the lives of people with spinal cord injuries. Yep. It always seems like that last hurdle of insurance and making sure that more people can actually acquire it and use it and gain the benefits of it is really kind of the hardest part of any kind of push. But it sounds like you guys are making great progress in that sense. And so that's awesome to hear.
Yep. It's exciting.
Well, so, when I went through this sentence here on my script with all these commas of all the different roles and responsibilities you've had, there are some politic titles in there. I mean, you were municipal mayor, deputy mayor, you were police commissioner. So how did that all come about? How did you get into the whole politics realm?
Yeah, so I in my town, I wanted to put a pool in like 2 years after I bought my house, and I had to go for a variance. And I was so annoyed because why do I have to go for a variance? I'm improving my home. I'm putting a built-in pool in. I had the whole plans, landscaping, beautiful. Excuse me. Why do I need to go for a variance? I should be able to dig holes in my yard if I want. That's how I felt.
Totally. Yeah.
But having background in the building trades, I understand, but was frustrated by the process, and ultimately kept getting delayed because they didn't have enough members to sit for the zoning board to go before them. So I wound up getting the approval on like December 11th of one year. And I called the contractor when I left that night and said, I got the approval. He said, all right, I can be there Christmas Eve day. I'll drop off everything. So they came Christmas Eve day. They ripped my fence down so they could get into the backyard and started loading in materials, and then disappeared until January 2nd and started doing my built-in pool. And they did it in 3 days, but they weren't able to fill it all up because it started to freeze. So they had it.
Yeah, I was going to say in the middle of the winter.
Yeah. But ultimately, I wound up. I was able to use it in the spring, and it's mint, but whatever. But so shortly after this, I was at a dinner with some people in town, and I happened to be sitting next to the mayor at the time. And he said, "Oh, Nick, I know about you." And I said, "Oh, what do you know about me?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I understand you had a hard time with this variance." I said, "Well, it wasn't really a hard time. It was more, it was more of a hassle."
Mm-hmm.
I understand trying to do it, whatever. If I was given the first date in September, I would have been done. It would have been a lot easier. And he said, well, I know you have experience in the building trades. Would you be interested in sitting on the zoning board? He said, I get to make appointments every year, and that time is in 2 weeks when we do our reorganization. And I'd like to be able to appoint you to the zoning board. And I said, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And I did that. I did that for several years. But a few years into it, I started to get involved. You're in the municipal building often.
Yeah.
You work with clerks, you work with building inspectors, you work with the tax collector, you're working with the township engineers and architects. And so I started to become friendly with a lot of people. And I was asked to run for it's called Township Committee because we're incorporated as a township, not as a city. So it's Township Committee as opposed to City Council, but it's essentially the same thing. It's a softer form of government. So I was flattered, but I wasn't in a position to do it at the time. I was traveling a lot for Johnson & Johnson and I'm sorry, for United Spinal, and it just wasn't a good time for me. But a couple of years later, I was approached again, and it felt like the right time. So I committed. I did what I had to do. I filed all my paperwork with the Federal Election Committee, and that was it. I started campaigning. I put together a plan on how I wanted to attack it. I had somebody that I knew that had ran campaigns before. I took on as a campaign manager. I had a running mate that was already in office, so he was running for re-election. So I had some of that experience. I knew the issues in town from being on the zoning board. Plus, when I decided I was going to run, I started going to a lot of the council meetings to better understand. And I wound up the day after. I started on July 5th. And I went to, I think, over 5,000 homes. Every home and apartment in town, I went and knocked on every single door.
Wow!
Just to introduce myself, handed out my brochure. And it was interesting. I think I mentioned it to you when we had spoken prior. But people ask, well, how did you get to use a wheelchair? How did you get to everyone's door? Well, the truth is, it was very few people that I was able to get directly to the door. I had a good running mate that would go with me. The days that he wasn't there, I had my nephew at the time was 13 or 14, loves politics. He got a buzz. He was my honorary campaign manager, came to all my fundraisers. And I ran, when you run for even local government like this, you're exposed to congressional leaders and senators. So I was with a lot of them, and my nephew just geeked out over all that. But I would
too bad you didn't have an iBOT to climb up everybody's steps and everything, right?
Yeah, right. My nephew would knock on the door and say, "Would you like to? My Uncle Nicky's running for, township committee. Would you like to come meet him?" And that he did. They would come down. So, listen, I'm not going to say it was easy. I mean, there were a lot of people that slammed the door. They don't want anything to do with you. But there's one thing I can handle. It's rejection. I mean, you learn to deal with that in sales. And certainly, fighting through a spinal cord injury, you come up with times you don't feel like you're doing as much as you should be or could be doing. So, you learn how to handle and manage that. So I won by a landslide, and I was seated. The election was on a Tuesday. My attorney was there. I was there when, sitting in the polls, getting the count. And there was no way. The municipal attorney came up to me and said, "Listen, you won by such a large margin that if anyone ever contested it, there would be no challenge. So you're able to sit tomorrow night as a council member elect in the first."
Awesome.
So I went the very next night. I was in the closed door meeting negotiating the police contracts. So it was
cool.
It was interesting. Yeah. And then from there, it blossomed. I became mayor. My first year I got fire commissioner. And I did that for all 3 years that I served, which was probably the biggest honor, even over being mayor. I love our fire department. These are people, men and women that in the middle of the night, and I knew because on my phone, I had the hookup I'd get all the calls in town. I can't even count how many times in my 3 years sitting up there that in the middle of the night, I'd get, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, I'd get a call that there's a smell of gas. I never got out of bed to go, but I know,
right.
I know those people were doing it. It was just an incredible experience to represent them, and make sure that, they had access to the things that they needed. It was the best part of the entire experience. I wound up being mayor for COVID. I was sworn in.
Oh, wow.
I think on January 4th, and like 2 months later, COVID broke out, which was crazy, because it was just from a municipal standpoint, government closures and all the different things, closing down the parks and working with the Board of Education, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, just overwhelming. When I look back at it now, I'm like, I wonder how I even got through it. It was crazy.
Yeah. What a ridiculous time to be plopped into that position too. I mean,
right.
Nobody obviously could have been prepared for what was to come when it came to COVID, but just the fact that you get thrown in and then immediately that's what takes place. It's, I think it's testament to your ability to adapt and be, for lack of a better term, think on your feet, and really just kind of, change with the times as the times need changing. So I want to kind of deviate just slightly from this, and I really have one final question for you. And it's really regarding both your own experience with your injury, but also just kind of the SCI community as a whole. Are there any kind of key lessons that your disability has taught you, or what kind of things have you learned from the community as a whole that have changed your outlook on spinal cord injury?
Yeah, I'll say spinal cord injury, but life in general. And my experience is the same as what I would see in the community itself is don't ever sell yourself short. If you see something that you want to do, go do it. Yeah. You figure out a way to do it. And it's not just, that's the way it's been for me. I grew up a Catholic. I believe in God. I believe that, He's driven me, as well as my family and my social support. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, besides me, I see it every day that I'm working. I see so many different people that go out there and just do it, and that's the one thing that I've learned is that if you want something, you can do it, regardless of your level of ability.
Awesome. Well, I think that about sums it up. I don't think I have any other further questions for you. It's been awesome talking to you. A wonderful story to hear. I think you are an inspiration for anybody who is, even going through a hard time, whether that be a spinal injury or anything of that sort. I think it shows that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is good. And it's just been great. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, David, one of the things I want to relay is I'm not sure, I'm sure there's people that are going to watch this and say, oh man, this guy's totally positive. How could he be positive with, not being able to walk? And I empathize. A story I didn't tell was when I was first injured at Kessler. I couldn't sit up for more than 15 degrees. I was probably there for 3 or 4 weeks. And my family had left. The lights were dim in the room, and someone wheeled into the room, all happy-go-lucky. It was a friend of somebody that I knew before I was injured, and he had told him that I was injured. He said, someone that I know is injured. You've done so much with your life. Would you go see him? And I can remember him rolling into the room, and I'm just thinking to myself, this guy, how could he be so happy? He can't walk. We were just in such different places. And it hurt me, I was like, I just couldn't understand how someone could be happy when they can't walk. They have all these bowel and bladder issues. How can someone truly be happy?
Right.
I can tell you now that I'm happy. And it wasn't long after that I became happy. And I say this because people that watch, don't think it's all easy. It's not easy. You have to have willpower, and you need to want to do well, but at the end of the day, you can do it. You just can do it. You can lead a good and productive life. And ironically, 2 weeks ago, I'm on the Kessler Disability Advisory Community Board.
Yeah.
And this gentleman's on the board with me now after almost 30 years. And I told him the story that you came into the room, and I just couldn't believe. I was like, who is this guy? Why would he be so happy? And we joke about it. So.
Another full circle moment.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I think what you're talking about is so important to remember, and that it's not going to happen overnight, and I don't think anything good in this world happens overnight, and so it's really having the patience and the understanding that it's the current state of your emotions and your thoughts are temporary, and that you can get to a better place. That's a huge thing to communicate. So
100%.
Well, perfect. So I think we're going to go ahead and close out. Everybody, thank you for watching and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, that sort of thing. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, you could always give us a follow. But Nick, again, it has been fantastic having you on. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
You as well. Thanks.